In a mansion of marble floors and golden chandeliers, a dinner party turns into a scene of cruelty and destiny. Victoria Blackstone, the proud wife of a millionaire, ridicules her new chef in front of her guests, mocking her clumsiness and stripping her of dignity. But what she doesn't know is this woman carries the same blood, the same childhood scars, and the same broken past. What happens when arrogance collides with truth? When wealth crashes into humility? When two sisters, separated by 20 years of silence, finally come face to face? This is more than a story. It's a mirror into pride, pain, and redemption. And trust me, you will want to follow this one to the very end. Before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because stories like this, raw, emotional, unforgettable, are what we share with you every single week. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Blackstone mansion, its rays filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the pristine gardens of Beverly Hills. Victoria Blackstone stood in her walk-in closet, a space larger than most people's apartments, selecting from an array of designer dresses that hung like colorful soldiers awaiting orders. At 35, Victoria had perfected the art of looking effortlessly elegant. Her blonde hair was always styled to perfection, her makeup applied with the precision of a master artist, and her clothes chosen to send a clear message. I belong here, and you don't. Mrs. Blackstone came the tentative voice of Maria, the housekeeper, from the doorway. The employment agency called. They're sending over 3 candidates for the chef position this morning. Victoria didn't turn around. She continued examining a Valentino dress, holding it against herself in the mirror. I told you, Maria, I want them here by 9 sharp. The Pemberton dinner party is tomorrow night, and I won't have another disaster like last month. Maria shifted uncomfortably. Yes, ma'am. They'll be here on time. They better be. The Pembertons are flying in from New York specifically for this dinner. Do you know what that means, Maria? No, ma'am. Victoria finally turned, her ice blue eyes fixing on the older woman with the intensity of a predator. It means that everything, and I mean everything, must be perfect. The flowers, the table settings, the music, and especially the food. One mistake, and word will spread through every social circle from here to Manhattan that Victoria Blackstone can't properly host a dinner party. Maria nodded quickly. Of course, Mrs. Blackstone. I understand. Good. And Maria, make sure you tell whoever we hire that I have very high standards. I don't tolerate incompetence, laziness, or excuses. If they can't handle the pressure, they shouldn't waste my time. As Maria hurried away, Victoria returned to her reflection. She smoothed down the fabric of her silk robe and admired the woman staring back at her. This was the life she had built, the identity she had crafted with meticulous care. Victoria Blackstone, socialite, philanthropist, wife of tech mogul Marcus Blackstone. But sometimes, in moments like these, when the house was quiet and the performance could rest for just a moment, she caught glimpses of someone else in the mirror. A scared little girl with tangled hair and second-hand clothes, clutching a worn stuffed animal and wondering why nobody wanted her. Victoria blinked hard, banishing the image. That girl was gone, had been gone for 20 years. Victoria had made sure of that. The sound of the mansion's front door chime echoed through the house at exactly 9 o'clock. Victoria made her way downstairs, her heels clicking against the marble with military precision. In the grand foyer, Maria stood with 3 women of varying ages, all looking somewhat intimidated by their surroundings. Mrs. Blackstone, Maria announced, the candidates from the employment agency. Victoria descended the staircase like a queen approaching her court, taking her time to let her presence fill the space. She had learned long ago that power wasn't just about money. It was about how you carried yourself, how you made others feel in your presence. The first candidate was an older woman in her 50s, with graying hair and nervous hands. Mrs. Blackstone, I'm Chef Margaret. No. Victoria cut her off with a wave of her hand. Too old. Next. The second candidate stepped forward, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25. I'm Jonathan, and I specialize in... Too inexperienced, Victoria interrupted again. I need someone who can handle the pressure of high society entertaining, not someone who's going to crumble under pressure. The third candidate stepped forward, and for a moment, Victoria felt something strange, a flicker of recognition that she couldn't quite place. The woman was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," the woman said, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in the room. "I have 15 years of experience in high-end restaurants and private dining. I can provide references from. Can you handle a dinner party for 20 of the most influential people in Los Angeles?" Victoria interrupted, circling Elena like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Yes, ma'am. I've catered events for up to 50 guests." "Can you work under pressure without falling apart?" "Absolutely. Can you follow instructions exactly as given without adding your own creative interpretations?" Elena hesitated for just a moment. "I believe in following the client's vision while bringing professional expertise too." "That wasn't what I asked," Victoria snapped. "I asked if you can follow instructions. Yes or no?" Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes." Victoria studied her for a long moment. There was something about this woman that irritated her, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Maybe it was the way Elena held herself, proud despite clearly needing this job. Maybe it was how she looked Victoria directly in the eyes instead of deferring like the other candidates. "Fine," Victoria said finally. "You start today. The dinner party is tomorrow night at 7. 20 guests, 5 courses, wine pairings. Maria will give you the menu and show you to the kitchen. Don't disappoint me." As the other 2 candidates were escorted out and Elena was led toward the kitchen, Victoria remained in the foyer, that strange feeling of familiarity nagging at her. She shook her head. It was probably nothing, just her imagination playing tricks on her. 2. Elena Rodriguez followed Maria through the labyrinthine hallways of the Blackstone mansion, her professional composure intact despite the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. She had worked in plenty of high-end kitchens that served celebrities and politicians, but there was something about Victoria Blackstone that set her on edge. Maybe it was the woman's obvious contempt for anyone she considered beneath her station. Maybe it was the way she had dismissed the other candidates like they were insects. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something Elena couldn't quite identify. "Here's the kitchen," Maria said, pushing open a set of double doors to reveal the chef's dream. Professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, a walk-in refrigerator, and enough space to comfortably prepare meals for a small army. "It's beautiful," Elena breathed, running her hand along the pristine countertop. "Mrs. Blackstone spares no expense," Maria agreed, but there was something in her tone that suggested this wasn't entirely a positive thing. "She's very particular about how things are done." Elena nodded, already mentally cataloging the equipment and planning the workflow for tomorrow's dinner party. "Has she always been like this?" Maria glanced toward the door, as if afraid Victoria might appear at any moment. "She's been through a lot of chefs in the past year. Mrs. Blackstone has very high standards. What happened to the last one? He quit after she made him redo an entire 7-course meal because one of the garnishes was placed a quarter-inch off-center." Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced a smile. "Well, I guess I'll just have to be extra careful with my garnish placement." Maria handed her a typed menu on expensive stationery. "Here's what she wants for tomorrow night. She's very specific about portions, presentation, timing, everything. She'll probably check on you every hour or so to make sure you're following her instructions exactly." Elena scanned the menu. Seared scallops with cauliflower puree, duck confit with cherry gastrique, wagyu beef with truffle risotto, cheese course with honey and walnuts, and chocolate souffle with raspberry coulis. It was ambitious but entirely doable for someone with her experience. "The wine pairings are in the cellar," Maria continued. "Mr. Blackstone has an extensive collection, but Mrs. Blackstone has already selected what she wants served. Don't deviate from her choices." "Of course not," Elena replied, though she privately disagreed with a couple of the wine selections. As Maria left her alone in the kitchen, Elena began taking inventory of the ingredients she would need. The refrigerator and pantry were well stocked with high-quality ingredients, and she had to admit that Victoria Blackstone certainly didn't cut corners when it came to food. Working alone in the vast kitchen, Elena found her mind wandering to places she usually kept locked away. There was something about this house, this situation, that felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the familiar dynamic of working for wealthy people who looked down on her, but there was more to it than that. She thought about the woman who had hired her, Victoria Blackstone. Blonde, imperious, beautiful in the way that money could make anyone beautiful. There had been something in her eyes, though, something that Elena recognized. It was pain carefully hidden behind layers of makeup and designer clothes and practiced arrogance, but pain nonetheless. Elena knew that look because she had seen it in her own mirror for most of her life. She pushed the thought away and focused on her work. Tomorrow night would be crucial, not just for this job, but for her career. If she could pull off a flawless dinner party for the Blackstone crowd, word would spread. More jobs would follow. Maybe she could finally save enough money to open her own restaurant, the dream she had been chasing for 15 years. As she worked through the afternoon, preparing stocks and sauces that would need to develop overnight, Elena found herself thinking about her sister. It was a habit she had never been able to break, even after all these years. Isabella would be 35 now, if she was still alive. Would she recognize her if they passed on the street? Would Elena recognize her? She touched the small silver locket that hung around her neck, hidden beneath her chef's uniform. It was the only thing she had left from her childhood, the only connection to the sister who had been ripped away from her when they were placed in different foster homes. The locket was only half of a set. Isabella had the other half, with their names engraved inside and sisters forever etched on the outside. Every job Elena took, every city she moved to, she harbored a secret hope that somehow, someway, she would find Isabella. It was a foolish hope, she knew. 20 years was a long time, and the world was vast. Isabella could be anywhere, could be anyone. She might not even remember having a sister. But Elena remembered. She remembered a little blonde girl with bright blue eyes who used to braid her hair and tell her bedtime stories when the foster homes were too scary to sleep. She remembered promising that they would find each other again, no matter what. "How's everything going in here?" Elena jumped to the sound of Victoria's voice. The woman had entered the kitchen silently, moving with the predatory grace Elena was beginning to associate with her. "Very well, Mrs. Blackstone," Elena replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm preparing the base components today, so everything will be fresh and perfectly timed tomorrow night." Victoria moved around the kitchen like an inspector, peering into pots and examining Elena's mise en place with a critical eye. "This sauce looks thin." "It's a reduction, ma'am. It needs to cook down slowly to develop the proper consistency and flavor." "I don't want excuses. I want results." Elena bit back her response and simply nodded. "Of course." Victoria continued her inspection, finding fault with the placement of Elena's knife roll. "Why isn't this put away properly? The temperature of the refrigerator. This seems too cold. And the organization of the spice rack. This isn't alphabetical." "Tomorrow night," Victoria said, stopping directly in front of Elena, "I will have some very important people in my dining room. These aren't just friends, they're business associates, social connections, people who can make or break reputations with a single word. Do you understand what that means?" "It means a meal needs to be perfect," Elena replied. "No," Victoria snapped. "It means you need to be perfect. Every plate, every timing, every interaction. I don't want to see you, hear you, or think about you tomorrow night. I want the food to appear as if by magic, flawlessly prepared and presented. Can you do that?" Elena met Victoria's icy stare with her own steady gaze. "Yes, ma'am. You won't even know I'm here." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, surprise, maybe, or annoyance that Elena wasn't properly intimidated. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. And again, Elena felt that strange sense of familiarity. "See that you aren't," Victoria said finally, and swept out of the kitchen like a queen dismissing a servant. Elena stood alone in the silent kitchen, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. She had dealt with difficult clients before, but there was something particularly cruel about Victoria Blackstone's brand of condescension. It wasn't just professional standards, it was personal contempt, as if Victoria viewed her as fundamentally lesser, unworthy of basic human respect. But Elena needed this job. She needed the money, needed the reference, needed the stepping stone it could provide toward her ultimate goal. She could handle one night of Victoria Blackstone's abuse if it meant getting closer to her dream. She touched her locket again, thinking of Isabella. Wherever her sister was now, Elena hoped she had found kindness in the world. She hoped Isabella had escaped the kind of cruelty that Elena seemed to encounter everywhere she went. Tomorrow night, she would cook the meal of her life. And then, hopefully, she would never have to see Victoria Blackstone again. The evening of the Pemberton dinner party arrived with a kind of perfect California weather that made the wealthy feel blessed and the poor feel mocked. Victoria stood in her master bedroom, putting the finishing touches on her appearance while her husband Marcus adjusted his bow tie in the mirror behind her. "You're nervous," Marcus observed, not unkindly. At 42, Marcus Blackstone had built a tech empire through a combination of brilliant innovation and ruthless business acumen. But he had learned to read his wife's moods with the precision of a meteorologist predicting storms. "I'm not nervous," Victoria lied, applying another coat of lipstick with surgical precision. "I'm focused. The new chef will be fine. You always hire the best." Victoria caught his eye in the mirror. Marcus was handsome in the way that money could enhance, his dark hair expertly cut, his skin tan from regular golf games, his body maintained by a personal trainer who cost more per hour than most people made in a day. But there was genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, something she had never quite learned to trust completely. "The Pembertons are flying in specifically for this dinner," Victoria reminded him. "Jonathan Pemberton could single-handedly make or break your East Coast expansion." "I know, darling. And everything will be perfect, just like it always is." But Victoria wasn't convinced. She had been on edge all day, unable to shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. Maybe it was the new chef. There had been something unsettling about Elena Rodriguez, something that nagged at Victoria like a word on the tip of her tongue that she couldn't quite recall. The first guests began arriving at 7 sharp, and Victoria slipped into her performance like an actress taking the stage. She glided through the mansion's grand rooms, greeting each arrival with the perfect blend of warmth and sophistication that had taken her years to master. The Pembertons arrived fashionably late, as was their privilege. Jonathan Pemberton was old money from New York, the kind of man who wore his wealth like a comfortable sweater, obvious to those who knew how to look, but never ostentatious. His wife, Sarah, was a former debutante who had turned her social connections into a small empire of charity work and cultural influence. "Victoria, darling," Sarah air-kissed both of Victoria's cheeks, her smile as polished as her diamonds. "The house looks absolutely divine." "Thank you, Sarah. I'm so excited for you both to try our new chef. I've heard wonderful things about her work." It was a lie, of course. Victoria had heard nothing about Elena's work except what the employment agency had told her. But presentation was everything in their world, and confidence was more valuable than truth. As the cocktail hour progressed, Victoria found herself checking her watch obsessively. The first course was scheduled to be served at 8:15, and she had made it clear to Elena that timing was crucial. A late start would throw off the entire evening's carefully orchestrated rhythm. At 8:10, Victoria excused herself from conversation with the mayor's wife and headed toward the kitchen. She needed to make sure everything was proceeding according to plan. She pushed through the kitchen doors to find Elena in her element, moving with the fluid precision of a dancer as she plated the first course. The seared scallops were perfect golden medallions atop pristine cauliflower puree, garnished with microgreens and a delicate drizzle of brown butter. "How are we doing?" Victoria asked, her voice sharp despite her attempt at casual inquiry. "Right on schedule," Elena replied without looking up from her plating. "The servers can take these out in 3 minutes." Victoria examined the plates with a critical eye, looking for any flaw she could find. The scallops were seared to perfection. The puree was silky and white as fresh snow. The garnish was placed with artistic precision. She hated to admit it, but Elena's work was flawless. "The portion sizes look small," Victoria said finally, because she had to find something to criticize. "They're exactly 4 ounces per guest, as specified in your menu," Elena replied calmly. "Well, make sure the next course is more generous." Elena nodded without arguing, and Victoria felt a flash of irritation at the woman's unflappable composure. Why wasn't she nervous? Why wasn't she scrambling to please Victoria like every other service person in her life? The first course was a triumph. Victoria watched as her guests savored every bite, their conversations growing more animated as the wine began to work its magic. Jonathan Pemberton actually closed his eyes while eating, a sure sign of approval. Compliments to the chef, he told Victoria as the servers cleared the plates. These scallops are extraordinary. Victoria basked in the praise, accepting it as if she had prepared the meal herself. I'm so glad you're enjoying them. Wait until you taste the duck. But as the evening progressed, Victoria found her anxiety increasing rather than diminishing. Everything was going perfectly, too. Perfectly. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Elena to make some catastrophic mistake that would ruin everything. During the main course service, Victoria made another trip to the kitchen. She found Elena calmly finishing the Wagyu beef, the kitchen organized and clean despite the complex meal being prepared. The Pemberton table wants their beef more rare, Victoria announced, though this wasn't true. She had seen Jonathan Pemberton enjoying his perfectly medium-rare steak just moments before. Elena glanced up. I can prepare a new one if you'd like, but it will delay service for the other guests. Are you questioning my instructions? No, ma'am. I'm just making sure you understand the consequences. There it was again, that calm, steady confidence that infuriated Victoria. Elena wasn't cowering, wasn't scrambling to appease her. She was simply doing her job with professional competence. Just keep doing what you're doing, Victoria muttered, and left the kitchen feeling frustrated and off balance. The cheese course was served without incident, a beautiful selection of imported cheeses with a specified honey and walnuts. Victoria was beginning to relax, beginning to believe that the evening might actually conclude without disaster. That's when Elena appeared in the dining room, carrying a tray of wine glasses to refill the guests' drinks for the dessert course. Victoria watched from across the room as Elena moved between the tables with practiced grace. She was almost invisible, just as Victoria had requested, a professional server doing her job without drawing attention to herself. But then disaster struck with the sudden inevitability of a California earthquake. Elena was refilling Sarah Pemberton's wine glass when Sarah gestured animatedly while telling a story about her recent trip to the Hamptons. Her elbow caught Elena's arm just as she was tilting the bottle, sending a stream of expensive Bordeaux cascading down the front of Sarah's cream-colored Chanel dress. The dining room fell silent as if someone had cut the audio feed to a movie. Sarah looked down at her ruined dress in shock, the red wine spreading across the delicate fabric like blood from a mortal wound. Oh my God, Sarah gasped. This dress cost $8,000. Elena immediately set down the wine bottle and reached for a towel. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Pemberton. Let me. Don't touch me, Sarah shrieked, jerking away as if Elena were contaminated. You've done enough? Damage. Victoria felt the familiar surge of panic and rage that always accompanied public embarrassment. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting to see how she would handle this catastrophe. Her reputation, her carefully constructed image, Marcus's business deal. Everything hung in the balance of this moment. Elena! Victoria's voice cut through the shocked silence like a whip crack. She stood up so violently that her chair tipped backward, adding to the drama of the moment. How could you be so careless? Mrs. Blackstone, Elena began, her face flushed with mortification. No excuses. Victoria advanced on Elena like a predator moving in for the kill. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you have any concept of how much that dress cost? How important these people are? The entire dining room watched the confrontation unfold like spectators at a gladiatorial arena. Victoria could feel their judgment, their whispered assessments of her character based on how she handled this crisis. You are exactly what I should have expected, Victoria continued, her voice rising with each word. Clumsy, incompetent, completely incapable of handling yourself in civilized company. I should have known better than to hire someone like you. Elena stood frozen in the center of the room, the wine-stained towel clutched in her hands, as Victoria's words hit her like physical blows. Victoria saw the hurt flash across Elena's face, saw her flinch at each insult, and felt a savage satisfaction at having regained control of the situation. Someone like me? Elena repeated quietly. Yes, Victoria snapped. Someone who doesn't belong here. Someone who will never understand what it means to maintain standards. Someone who, she paused, searching for the most cutting thing she could say. Someone who will never amount to anything more than kitchen help. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Victoria saw Elena's face crumble, saw the professional mask slip away to reveal raw pain beneath. For just a moment, Victoria felt the stab of something that might have been guilt. But then she remembered her audience, remembered what was at stake, and hardened her heart against any sympathy. "You're fired," Victoria announced loudly enough for every guest to hear. "Get out of my house. Security will escort you out." Elena looked around the room at the sea of judgmental faces, at the wealthy people who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenient servant who had disrupted their perfect evening. Victoria saw something die in Elena's eyes in that moment, some spark of hope or dignity that had been keeping her upright. Without another word, Elena turned and walked toward the kitchen, her shoulders straight despite the humiliation. Victoria watched her go, feeling both triumphant and strangely hollow. The rest of the evening proceeded smoothly. Victoria managed to salvage the dinner party through sheer force of personality and expensive wine. Sarah Pemberton was eventually mollified by Victoria's profuse apologies and the promise to pay for a replacement dress. Jonathan Pemberton even laughed about the incident by the time the brandy was served, calling it the most excitement we've had at a dinner party in years. Marcus's business deal was secured. Victoria's reputation remained intact. By all measures, the evening was a success. So why did Victoria feel like she had lost something important? 4. It was nearly midnight when Victoria finally closed the front door behind the last of her guests. The mansion felt eerily quiet after hours of animated conversation and laughter, like a theater after the audience has gone home. Marcus had already retreated to his study to make some international calls, as he often did after social events. Victoria found herself alone in the grand foyer, surrounded by the detritus of successful entertaining. Empty wine glasses, wilted flowers, the faint aroma of expensive perfume and Cuban cigars. "Maria," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Have the cleaning crew take care of this tomorrow. I'm going upstairs." But as she climbed the marble staircase, Victoria felt an odd restlessness. She should have been exhausted. She had been performing for hours, maintaining the perfect facade of gracious hostess, while internally managing every detail of the evening. Instead, she felt wired, as if she had consumed too much caffeine. The image of Elena's face kept flashing through her mind, not the confident professional expression she had worn in the kitchen, but the devastated look when Victoria had publicly destroyed her in front of 20 of Los Angeles's most influential people. The way Elena's shoulders had sagged, the way her hands had trembled as she set down the wine bottle. Victoria shook her head, trying to dismiss the memory. Elena had made a mistake, a costly one, and had faced the consequences. That's how the world worked. Actions had repercussions, and people in service positions needed to understand that their carelessness could have serious consequences. But something nagged at her, a persistent voice in the back of her mind that whispered uncomfortable truths. It had been an accident. Elena had been doing exactly what Victoria had asked, refilling wine glasses during the cheese course. Sarah Pemberton had been gesticulating wildly, as she always did when she'd had too much wine. The collision had been inevitable. Victoria reached her bedroom and began the ritual of removing her evening wear, the designer dress, the diamonds, the carefully applied makeup. As she cleansed her face in the bathroom mirror, she caught sight of herself without the armor of wealth and beauty. For just a moment, she looked vulnerable, human. She thought about Elena's eyes when she had called her someone who will never amount to anything more than kitchen help. There had been something familiar in that pain, something that resonated with a part of Victoria she had tried to bury. On her way to bed, Victoria noticed something on the hallway floor near the top of the stairs, a small piece of paper that must have been dropped during the evening's commotion. She picked it up absently, planning to throw it away, but something about it made her look closer. It was a photograph, old and worn around the edges. The colors had faded with age, but she could still make out two young girls in the image. They were sitting on a swing set, probably at a park somewhere, their arms around each other and huge smiles on their faces. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The older girl in the photo had dark hair and brown eyes, and even though she was probably only 7 or 8 years old, Victoria could see Elena Rodriguez in her features. But it was the younger girl that made Victoria's world tilt on its axis. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a gap-toothed grin that Victoria remembered seeing in her own childhood photographs. With trembling hands, Victoria turned the photo over. In a child's careful handwriting, someone had written, Elena and Isabella, sisters forever, summer 2003. Isabella. The name hit Victoria like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories she had spent 20 years trying to suppress. Isabella, the name she had been born with before she became Victoria, before she was adopted by the Ashfords and transformed into someone else entirely. Elena. Elena Rodriguez was her sister. Her baby sister who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who had cried when they were separated at the group home, who had made Victoria promise they would find each other again someday. Victoria sank onto the hallway floor, the photograph clutched in her shaking hands. Elena had been right here, in her house, cooking in her kitchen. Victoria had spent hours with her, had looked directly into her eyes, and hadn't recognized her own sister. But how could she have? Elena looked nothing like the 7-year-old with pigtails and missing teeth who lived in Victoria's carefully buried memories. She had grown into a beautiful woman, confident and professional and completely transformed from the frightened child Victoria remembered. Just as Victoria had transformed herself from Isabella Vasquez into Victoria Blackstone. The realization of what she had done hit her like a freight train. She had screamed at her sister, humiliated her in front of strangers, called her worthless and incompetent. She had looked Elena in the eye and told her she would never amount to anything. She had done to Elena exactly what had been done to them both as children. Dismissed her, degraded her, treated her as if she were less than human. Victoria pressed the photograph to her chest and began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had kept locked away for 2 decades. She cried for the sister she had lost, for the promises she had broken, for the woman she had become. She cried for Elena, who had been searching for her family just as desperately as Victoria had once searched for hers. Elena, who had probably hoped against hope that someday, somewhere, she would find her sister Isabella again. And when she finally did, Isabella had become someone else entirely. Someone cruel and cold and completely unrecognizable. Victoria don't know how long she sat on the floor, clutching that faded photograph and sobbing for everything she had lost. But eventually, she became aware that someone was calling her name. Victoria? Victoria, what's wrong? Marcus was kneeling beside her, his face creased with concern. He must have come upstairs from his study and found her collapsed in the hallway like a broken doll. Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain what she had discovered? How could she tell her husband that his sophisticated, elegant wife was actually Isabella Vasquez from East L.A., a foster kid who had lied her way into a new identity? Did someone call? Is it bad news about someone in your family? The irony of the question made Victoria laugh through her tears, a bitter sound that echoed in the marble hallway. Family? Marcus didn't even know she had a family, had never questioned her carefully constructed story about being an orphan with no living relatives. I need to find someone, Victoria said finally, her voice hoarse from crying. I need to find Elena. The chef? Victoria, what are you talking about? You fired her tonight. I made a mistake, Victoria whispered. The biggest mistake of my life. Marcus helped her to her feet, his expression confused but patient. He had learned over the years of their marriage that Victoria sometimes had emotional episodes that she couldn't fully explain, and he had developed the skill of providing comfort without demanding explanations. Okay, he said simply, then we'll find her. But right now, you need to rest. We'll sort this out in the morning. But Victoria knew that morning might be too late. Elena could be anywhere by now, on a bus back to whatever city she had come from, erasing Los Angeles from her memory just as Victoria had once tried to erase her past. As Marcus led her toward their bedroom, Victoria clutched the photograph like a lifeline. Somewhere out there in the vast city, Elena Rodriguez was probably packing her belongings and nursing her wounds, unaware that the woman who had destroyed her evening was the sister she had been searching for her entire life. Victoria had spent 20 years becoming someone else, someone who could never be hurt or abandoned or found wanting. But in doing so, she had abandoned the one person who had always loved her unconditionally. She had to find Elena. She had to explain. She had to try to undo the damage she had done. even if it meant revealing every carefully guarded secret about who she really was. Even if it meant destroying the life she had built as Victoria Blackstone. Because some things were more important than reputation or status or the approval of strangers. Some things, like the love of a sister, were worth any sacrifice. 5. Victoria barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elena's face crumpling under the weight of her cruel words. She saw the professional mask slipping away to reveal the vulnerable woman beneath. A woman who was searching for her family just as desperately as Victoria had once searched for hers. At 6 in the morning, Victoria gave up on sleep and padded downstairs to the kitchen. The staff wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours, and she needed the solitude to think, to plan, to figure out how to undo the terrible things she had done. The kitchen still bore traces of the previous night's dinner party. A few wine glasses in the sink, lingering aromas of the elaborate meal Elena had prepared. Victoria stood in the space where her sister had worked, trying to absorb some sense of her presence. On the counter near the stove, she noticed something that made her heart skip. A small silver locket on a thin chain, probably forgotten in Elena's hurried departure. Victoria picked it up with trembling fingers and examined it closely. It was identical to the one she kept hidden in her jewelry box upstairs. Half of a set they had shared as children. This half bore Elena's name engraved inside and sister's forever etched on the outside. The matching piece Victoria had kept all these years bore her birth name, Isabella. Victoria sank into a chair at the kitchen island, holding Elena's locket in her palm. Her sister had been here in her house, wearing the symbol of their childhood bond, and Victoria had been too blind to see it, too caught up in her performance as the perfect socialite to recognize the most important person in her life. Mrs. Blackstone? Victoria looked up to find Maria standing in the kitchen doorway, her face creased with concern. The older woman was usually unflappable, but she seemed shaken by whatever she had to report. "What is it, Maria?" "I tried calling Elena this morning. The employment agency gave me her contact information so I could arrange for her final payment, but—" Maria hesitated. "Her phone is disconnected, and the address she gave appears to be a motel. They said she checked out early this morning." Victoria's heart sank. Elena was gone, vanished into the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles like she had never existed at all. But Victoria couldn't give up, not when she had finally found the sister she had lost 20 years ago. "Maria, I need you to help me," Victoria said, her voice urgent. "I need to find Elena Rodriguez. Call the employment agency back. Get everything they have on her, previous employers, references, anything that might tell us where she went." Maria's eyebrows rose slightly. It was highly unusual for Victoria to show such concern for a dismissed employee, but she nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Blackstone. And Maria, this is extremely important. More important than anything I've ever asked you to do." As Maria hurried away to make the calls, Victoria remained in the kitchen, Elena's locket warm in her palm. She thought about the 7-year-old girl who had promised never to forget her, who had cried when they were separated, who had probably spent years wondering what had happened to her big sister Isabella. The employment agency had limited information. Elena had worked at several high-end restaurants over the past few years. Le Bernardin in New York, Chez Laurent in San Francisco, the Ivy in West Hollywood. But her references were all professional contacts, no personal information that might indicate where she would go when she needed to disappear. Victoria spent the morning making calls, using every connection she had in the restaurant industry to trace Elena's movements. She learned that Elena was regarded as an exceptional chef, professional and reliable, but also intensely private. None of her former employers knew much about her personal life. By afternoon, Victoria was becoming desperate. She had even considered hiring a private investigator, but something told her that Elena wouldn't be found unless she wanted to be. And after last night's humiliation, Elena would probably go to great lengths to avoid any further contact with Victoria Blackstone. That's when inspiration struck. Victoria drove to East L.A., to the neighborhood where she and Elena had lived briefly as children before being placed in foster care. It was a world away from Beverly Hills. Chain-link fences instead of manicured hedges, apartment buildings instead of mansions, the distant hum of freeway traffic instead of perfect silence. She hadn't been back here in 20 years, but she remembered the address. 1247 Esperanza Street. The small house where they had lived with their grandmother for 6 months before she died, and they were placed in the system. The house was still there, though it looked smaller and more rundown than Victoria remembered. A different family lived there now, a young Hispanic woman with 2 small children who eyed Victoria's expensive car with suspicion. "Excuse me," Victoria called out as she approached the front yard. "I'm looking for someone who used to live here many years ago." "Elena Rodriguez?" She would have been a little girl then, maybe 7 years old. The woman shook her head. "I don't know any Elena Rodriguez. We've been here 5 years. Victoria thanked her and drove away, feeling foolish. What had she expected? That Elena would return to their childhood home like some kind of literary character seeking her roots. But as she drove through the old neighborhood, Victoria began to notice something. Every few blocks, there was a small restaurant or food truck serving traditional Mexican cuisine. Elena was a chef. If she had come back to this area, she might have sought work at one of these establishments. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon visiting every restaurant in a 10-mile radius, showing Elena's employment photo to managers and owners. Most shook their heads, but at a small family-owned place called Abuela Rosa's, the elderly owner's eyes lit up with recognition. CC, Rosa Morales nodded enthusiastically. "Elena came here this morning very early. She was looking for work, but also, how do you say, she was very sad? Crying." Victoria's heart clenched. "Did she say where she was going?" "She said she wanted to leave Los Angeles, start over somewhere new. I told her about my cousin in Phoenix who owns a restaurant, but..." Rosa shrugged. "I don't know if she went there. Phoenix, it wasn't much, but it was something." Victoria thanked Rosa and drove home, her mind already planning the next phase of her search. But when she arrived at the mansion, she found Marcus waiting for her in the foyer, his expression unreadable. "Victoria, we need to talk." 6. Marcus led Victoria into his study, a masculine room lined with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. It was where he conducted his most sensitive business conversations, and Victoria knew that whatever he wanted to discuss was serious. "Sit down," he said gently. But there was something in his tone that made Victoria's stomach clench with anxiety. She perched on the edge of a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus poured himself a scotch but didn't offer her one, another sign that this wasn't a casual conversation. "I've been thinking about last night," Marcus began, settling into the chair across from her. "About your reaction to firing that chef. About finding you collapsed in the hallway, crying over an old photograph." Victoria's mouth went dry. "Marcus, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I've been married to you for 8 years, Victoria, and I've never seen you react that way to anything. Not even when your supposed best friend, Sarah Mitchell, betrayed your confidence to the press. Not when that charity scandal nearly destroyed your reputation. But you fire a chef for spilling wine and you fall apart." Victoria stared at him, unable to form words. She had always known this moment might come, the moment when her carefully constructed past would collide with her present reality. "The photograph," Marcus continued quietly. "I saw it before I helped you up. 2 little girls, one of whom looked remarkably like you might have as a child. The names on the back, Elena and Isabella." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the walls she had built around her old life beginning to crumble. "Your name isn't really Victoria Blackstone, is it?" Marcus asked. "It wasn't even Victoria Ashford when we met." "Were you really?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Victoria had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times over the years, had prepared explanations and justifications, and carefully crafted half-truths. But now, faced with her husband's gentle but implacable questioning, she found she had no energy left for lies. "Isabella," she whispered. "Isabella Vasquez. That's who I was before the Ashfords adopted me." Marcus nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "And Elena?" "My sister. My little sister." Victoria's voice broke on the words. "We were separated when we were placed in foster care. I was adopted and she wasn't. I lost track of her completely. Until last night." "Until last night," Victoria confirmed. "She was right there, Marcus, in our kitchen, cooking for our guests, and I didn't recognize her. 20 years, and I didn't know my own sister." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, swirling the scotch in his glass. Victoria waited for his response, terrified that he would be angry about the deception, disgusted by her humble origins, ready to end their marriage over her lies. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. "Because I was ashamed," Victoria admitted. "Because Isabella Vasquez was poor and unwanted and forgotten. Because I worked so hard to become Victoria, to earn my place in your world. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd realize I didn't belong." "My world?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Victoria, do you know how I grew up?" She frowned. Marcus came from old money, inherited wealth that went back generations. Everyone knew that. "I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio," Marcus said quietly. "My father worked construction when he could get it. My mother cleaned houses. I got into MIT on a full scholarship and borrowed money for everything else. The old family money story? That's something my publicist invented when my company went public. I thought it would be better for business." Victoria stared at him in shock. "But your family died in a car accident when I was in college. I have no family, Victoria. No trust fund, no inherited connections. Everything I have, I built from nothing." He leaned forward in his chair. "Just like you did." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. All these years, she had been hiding her past from a man who had his own secrets, his own shame about his humble beginnings. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, echoing his earlier question. Marcus smiled sadly. "For the same reason you didn't tell me. Because I was afraid you'd think I didn't belong in your world." They sat in silence for a moment, both absorbing the irony of their mutual deception. Two people from nothing, each pretending to be something else, each afraid the other wouldn't love the truth. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Marcus said finally. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have—" "Hey." Marcus moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "We both did what we thought we had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. But now we know better, and we can do better." Victoria looked into her husband's eyes and saw not judgment or disgust, but understanding. Love, acceptance of who she really was, not just the persona she had created. "I have to find her," Victoria said. "I have to find Elena and explain. I have to try to make this right." "Then we'll find her," Marcus said simply. "Whatever it takes." Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't alone with her secrets. She had an ally, a partner who understood what it meant to reinvent yourself from scratch. "There's something else," Victoria said, pulling Elena's locket for her pocket. "I found this in the kitchen. It's half of a set we shared as children." Marcus examined the delicate piece of jewelry. "She must have been looking for you, too. All these years while I was trying to forget Isabella Vasquez ever existed, Elena was probably searching for her." Victoria's voice was thick with guilt. What if she recognized me last night? What if she knew who I was when I was screaming at her? The thought was almost too painful to bear. Bad enough that Victoria had humiliated her sister, but if Elena had recognized her, had known that her long-lost sister Isabella had become someone who could treat her with such cruelty. "We'll find her," Marcus repeated, his voice firm with determination. "And when we do, you'll explain everything. You'll tell her who you really are. When she can't forgive me, then you'll keep trying until she can. That's what family does." Victoria squeezed her husband's hands, drawing strength from his certainty. She had spent 20 years running from Isabella Vasquez, but maybe it was time to embrace that scared little girl from East LA. Maybe it was time to stop being ashamed of where she came from and start honoring the people who had shaped her. "I love you," she told Marcus. "The real you?" Marcus from Ohio, who worked construction. Marcus smiled. "And I love you, Isabella Vasquez, who became Victoria Blackstone. All of you." For the first time since finding that photograph, Victoria felt a spark of hope. She had lost her sister 20 years ago through circumstance and fear. She had lost her again last night through pride and cruelty. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find her one more time. This time, Victoria wouldn't let Isabella down. 7. The next morning, Victoria and Marcus sat in their kitchen with maps spread across the Marble Island, plotting Elena's possible routes out of Los Angeles. Marcus had used his business connections to trace credit card records and employment databases, while Victoria had spent hours on the phone with restaurant owners across the Southwest. She bought gas in Riverside yesterday evening, Marcus reported, looking up from his laptop. After that, the trail goes cold. That's heading toward Phoenix, Victoria mused, remembering Rosa's suggestion about her cousin's restaurant. It makes sense, she's a chef, she needs work, and Phoenix has a growing culinary scene. Marcus closed his laptop and looked at his wife seriously. Victoria, I need you to think about this carefully. We could hire a private investigator, do this the easy way. But if we go chasing after Elena ourselves, you're going to have to be prepared to tell her everything. About who you are, about your life, about why you never look for her. Victoria fingered Elena's locket, which she now wore around her neck like a talisman. I know. I've been thinking about it all night. About what I'll say when I see her. And the truth. Victoria's voice was steady despite her fear. All of it, even if it destroys everything I've built. Marcus reached across the island and squeezed her hand. It won't destroy everything. The things that matter, us, the life we've built together, that's all real. The rest is just window dressing. Within 2 hours, they were in Marcus's Bentley, heading east on Interstate 10 toward Arizona. Victoria had never made an impulsive decision like this in her adult life, leaving Los Angeles without a detailed plan, chasing after someone who might not even want to be found. But as they drove through the desert landscape, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of authenticity. She wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't calculating the social or professional impact of her actions. She was just a sister trying to find her family. They stopped in Phoenix first, visiting the restaurant Rosa had mentioned. Elena had indeed been there, but only briefly. The owner remembered her as talented but distracted, and she had declined the job offer after working just one shift. She seemed like she was running from something, the owner told them. Or running toward something, hard to tell which. From Phoenix, the trail led to Tucson, then to Las Cruces, New Mexico. At each stop, Victoria and Marcus found traces of Elena's passage. A chef who had worked a few days at a hotel restaurant. A woman matching her description who had asked about job opportunities at a food truck. She's moving fast, Marcus observed, as they checked into a motel in Santa Fe. Like she doesn't want to stay in one place long enough to be found. Victoria stared out the motel window at the alien landscape of the Southwest. She had never been this far from Los Angeles, had never seen the vast empty spaces between cities, the small towns that seemed to exist in defiance of the desert's hostility. This is what she's been doing for years, Victoria realized. Moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Always searching. Searching for what? For me. For home. For family. Victoria's voice was thick with emotion. While I was building my perfect life in Beverly Hills, Elena was wandering the country looking for her sister. The weight of that realization settled over Victoria like a physical burden. Elena had never stopped believing they would find each other. Even as an adult, even after 20 years of disappointment, she had kept searching. And when she finally did find her sister, Victoria had treated her like garbage. The next morning brought a breakthrough. At a small diner outside Santa Fe, the owner recognized Elena's photo immediately. Oh yes, the chef lady. She was here yesterday morning, very early. Seemed upset about something, but she was real polite. Good tipper too. Did she say where she was going? Victoria asked, her heart pounding. Colorado, I think. Said something about the mountains being good for thinking. Colorado. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. There was only one place in Colorado that would draw Elena, one destination that held significance for both of them. Aspen, Victoria said quietly. Marcus looked confused. Why Aspen? Because that's where the Ashfords used to take me for skiing vacations when I was a teenager. I used to talk about it all the time when Elena and I were kids, this magical place in the mountains where rich people went to play in the snow. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I used to promise her that someday, when I was successful enough, I'd take her there. We'd stay in a fancy hotel and eat at expensive restaurants and pretend we belonged. It was another broken promise to add to Victoria's growing collection. Another dream she had offered her sister and then forgotten when it became inconvenient. They drove through the afternoon and into the evening, climbing steadily into the Rocky Mountains as the temperature dropped and the air grew thin. Victoria found herself remembering fragments of conversations from their childhood. Elena's wonder when Victoria described snow-covered peaks, her excitement at the idea of skiing, her absolute faith that her big sister would keep her promises. Aspen in late spring was quieter than during ski season, but still bustling with tourists and seasonal workers. The streets were crowded with expensive cars and people who looked like they had never worried about money in their lives. Victoria felt like a fraud walking among them, despite wearing clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She belonged here by virtue of her marriage and wealth, but she would always be Isabella Vasquez from East LA underneath the designer labels. They checked into the St. Regis, the kind of luxury hotel that had once seemed impossible to Victoria when she was a foster kid dreaming of a different life. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was finally in Aspen, the place she had promised to bring Elena, and she was here looking for her sister, who was probably sleeping in her car. "Where do we start?" Marcus asked as they stood in their palatial suite, looking out at the mountain peaks. "The restaurants," Victoria replied. "Elena's a chef. If she's here, she's working." They spent the next 2 days visiting every restaurant, hotel, and catering company in Aspen and the surrounding area. Victoria showed Elena's photo to managers and owners, describing her as a family member they urgently needed to find. Most of the responses were negative, but gradually a pattern emerged. Elena had been in Aspen, but she had turned down several job offers. She seemed to be looking for something specific, though no one could say what. It was the manager of a small cafe near the base of Ajax Mountain who provided the crucial information. "Yeah, I remember her," he said, studying Elena's photo. "Talented chef, but she wasn't really interested in working. She kept asking about hiking trails, places where someone could go to be alone. I got the impression she was dealing with something heavy, like she needed to think." "Did you tell her about any specific places?" Victoria asked, her pulse quickening. "I mentioned Maroon Lake. It's about an hour drive from here, up in the wilderness area. Beautiful spot, very peaceful. Perfect for someone who wants to get away from it all." Victoria knew immediately that's where Elena would be. Maroon Lake, surrounded by the famous Maroon Bells Peaks, was one of the most photographed locations in Colorado. It was also remote enough that someone could disappear for days without being disturbed. As they drove up the winding mountain road toward Maroon Lake the next morning, Victoria felt her anxiety increase with each mile. What would she say to Elena when she found her? How could she possibly explain 20 years of silence, of willful forgetting, of choosing comfort over family? The parking area near Maroon Lake was nearly empty. It was still early in the season, and the weather was unpredictable in the high country. Victoria and Marcus hiked the short trail to the lake in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. And there, sitting on a fallen log at the water's edge with her back to the trail, was Elena. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the vastness of the mountain landscape surrounding her. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she was staring out at the reflection of the maroon bells in the perfectly still water. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. After days of searching, after a journey of more than 1,000 miles, she had finally found her sister. Now came the hardest part, finding the words to bring her home. 8. Victoria stood frozen on the trail, 20 yards away from her sister, unable to take another step. Elena sat motionless by the water's edge, completely unaware that she was being observed. The morning sun painted the mountain peaks in shades of gold and rose, and the lake was so still it looked like a mirror. Marcus touched Victoria's arm gently. "Do you want me to wait here?" Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. This conversation needed to happen between sisters, without witnesses or safety nets. She forced herself to walk forward, each step feeling like it carried the weight of 20 years. Elena must have heard footsteps on the gravel trail, because she turned slightly when she saw Victoria approaching. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, and finally, a careful blankness that hurt more than anger would have. "Mrs. Blackstone," Elena said quietly, turning back to face the lake. "I have to admit, this is the last place I expected to see you." Victoria stopped a few feet behind Elena's log, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Elena could hear it. My name isn't Victoria Blackstone. Not really. Elena didn't respond, didn't turn around. She just continued staring at the water as if Victoria hadn't spoken. My name is Isabella Vasquez, Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. At least it used to be before I was adopted, before I became someone else. This time Elena did react. Her shoulders tensed, and Victoria saw her hands grip the edge of the log. I found your photograph, Victoria said, pulling the faded image from her pocket. The one of us at the playground. You dropped it the night of the dinner party. Elena finally turned to look at her, and Victoria saw that her sister's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. I know who you are, Elena said quietly. I've known since the moment I saw you. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. You recognize me? Of course I recognized you. You're my sister. 20 years, plastic surgery, designer clothes. None of that changes the way someone holds their head, or the shape of their hands, or the way they laugh when they think no one is listening. Elena's voice was steady, but Victoria could hear the pain underneath. I recognized you, and I prayed that you would recognize me too. Victoria sank onto the log beside Elena, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have? Should have what? Elena turned to face her fully now, and Victoria saw 20 years of hurt and abandonment in her sister's eyes. Should have recognized the sister you spent 2 decades trying to forget? Should have acknowledged the family you were ashamed of. I wasn't ashamed of you, Victoria said desperately. I was ashamed of myself, of where I came from, of what I was, what you were. Elena's voice rose slightly. You were my sister. You were the person who promised to find me, who said we'd always be together, who held me when I was scared and told me bedtime stories and braided my hair. Elena's voice broke. You were the most important person in my world, and you disappeared. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. The Ashford, the family who adopted me, they wanted me to make a clean break from my past. They said it would be better for everyone if I focused on my new life instead of dwelling on what I'd lost. And you listened to them. I was 15 years old. Victoria cried. I was a scared kid who wanted so badly to belong somewhere, to finally have a family that wouldn't give me back or forget about me. When they offered me a chance to become their daughter, really become their daughter, with their name and their history, I thought it was a miracle. Elena stared at her for a long moment. Did you ever try to find me? The question hung between them like a sword. Victoria could lie, could soften the truth, could make herself look better. But she had come too far for anything less than complete honesty. At first, she said quietly, for the first few years, I asked social services about you. But the trail was cold. You'd been moved between foster homes, and eventually they lost track of you entirely. Victoria took a shaky breath. And then I stopped looking. Elena nodded as if this was the answer she had expected. Why? Because it hurt too much. Because every failed search reminded me of everything I'd lost. Because I was building a new life, and I convinced myself that looking backward would only hold me back. Victoria's voice was barely audible. Because I was a coward. They sat in silence for several minutes. The only sounds the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a hawk circling the peaks above them. I never stopped looking, Elena said finally. Even when I should have given up, even when everyone told me you were probably dead or had completely disappeared, I kept searching. I moved from city to city, taking jobs at high-end restaurants because I thought maybe if you had been adopted by a wealthy family, you'd be in places like that. Victoria closed her eyes, imagining Elena's lonely journey across the country, always hoping, always searching. The locket, Elena continued, touching her throat where the chain should have been. I wore it every day for 20 years. It was the only thing I had left of you. I have it, Victoria said quickly, pulling the silver chain from under her shirt. And I have this. She reached into her purse and pulled out the matching half of the locket, the one inscribed with Isabella. Elena stared at the 2 pieces of jewelry, the physical representation of their broken bond. You kept it. I kept it, but I hid it, even from my husband. I was so afraid that someone would ask questions, would want to know about my past. Victoria fastened Elena's locket around her sister's neck with trembling fingers. I'm not afraid anymore. Elena touched the familiar weight of the locket, her eyes filling with tears. When I saw you at that dinner party, when I realized who you had become, I wanted to tell you who I was, but I was terrified. You were so elegant, so confident, so completely different from the scared little girl I remembered. I thought maybe you'd be embarrassed to have a sister like me. Embarrassed? Victoria laughed bitterly. Elena, you're everything I should have been. You're talented, successful, genuine. You built a career through your own skill and determination. You never forgot where you came from or who you were. I'm a nomad, Elena said quietly. I moved from job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to build real relationships. I've spent my entire adult life searching for something I lost when I was 7 years old. Victoria reached out hesitantly and took Elena's hand. To her relief, Elena didn't pull away. I'm sorry, Victoria said, pouring 20 years of regret into the words. I'm sorry I stopped looking. I'm sorry I became someone who could treat you the way I did at that dinner party. I'm sorry I broke every promise I ever made to you. Elena squeezed her hand. I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to tell you who I was. I'm sorry I let you humiliate me without fighting back. I'm sorry I ran away instead of staying to confront you. They sat together by the mountain lake, two sisters who had found each other and lost each other and found each other again, holding hands and watching the sun climb higher above the snow-capped peaks. What happens now? Elena asked finally. Victoria turned to look at her sister, really look at her, not through the lens of class and status and social positioning, but as a little girl who had once been her whole world. Now, Victoria said, I'd like to take you home. 9. The drive back to Los Angeles took 2 days, but Victoria felt like she was experiencing the landscape for the first time in her life. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's Bentley, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories from her years of wandering across the American West. I worked at a dude ranch in Montana for 3 months, Elena said as they passed through Colorado's ranch country. The pay was terrible, but I learned how to cook over an open fire and handle horses. The owner's daughter was about 7 years old, and she reminded me so much of you at that age. Victoria listened to these stories with a mixture of fascination and guilt. While she had been attending charity galas and dinner parties, Elena had been living a dozen different lives in a dozen different places, always moving, always searching. Marcus, who was driving, caught Victoria's eye in the rearview mirror. You should tell Elena about your restaurant idea, he said quietly. Elena looked curious. What restaurant idea? Victoria felt suddenly shy. The plan she and Marcus had discussed during their search seemed presumptuous now that they had actually found Elena. Well, we were thinking about opening a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, but something special. A place that serves elevated versions of the foods we grew up with, the dishes our grandmother used to make. Elena's eyes widened. You remember Abuela's cooking? I remember everything, Victoria said softly. Her mole, her tamales, the way she could make magic happen with a few vegetables and some leftover rice. I remember how she used to let us help in the kitchen, how you always wanted to stir the pot. I became a chef because of her, Elena admitted. Every dish I've ever created has been an attempt to recreate that feeling of being in her kitchen, of being part of a family. Victoria reached across the seat and took her sister's hand. So let's build that family again. Let's create a place where people can experience what we experienced, the warmth, the love, the sense of belonging that comes from sharing a meal made with care. Elena was quiet for a long time, staring out at the passing landscape. You'd really want to do that? Give up your socialite life to run a restaurant with your long-lost sister. Elena, being a socialite was never my life. It was my disguise. Running a restaurant with you, honoring Abuela's memory, creating something real and meaningful that sounded like the life I was supposed to have. When they reached Los Angeles, Victoria was surprised to find that the city looked different to her eyes. The sprawling metropolis that had once seemed like the center of the universe now felt like just another stop on a larger journey. Marcus drove them directly to the mansion in Beverly Hills, and Victoria watched nervously as Elena took in the opulent surroundings. Would her sister see this place as a symbol of Victoria's betrayal, a monument to everything she had chosen over family? But Elena's reaction surprised her. It's beautiful, she said simply, but it doesn't look like you. Victoria laughed. That's because it isn't me. It's Victoria Blackstone's house. Isabella Vasquez would never live somewhere this cold and formal. They spent that first evening in the kitchen, the same kitchen where their reunion had begun with such cruelty. But now the space felt transformed, warmed by Elena's presence and the gradual rebuilding of their bond. Elena cooked dinner for them, simple comfort food that somehow tasted better than any of the elaborate meals Victoria had served to her society friends. As they ate, Victoria found herself remembering what it felt like to be part of a real family, not just the performed version she had created for public consumption. I have something to show you, Victoria said after they had finished eating. She led Elena upstairs to her walk-in closet, that monument to material excess, and moved aside a panel in the wall to reveal a hidden safe. From the safe, she pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. Inside were the few mementos she had kept from her childhood, photographs, a school report card, a small stuffed elephant that had once been Elena's favorite toy. You kept Mr. Peanuts, Elena exclaimed, reaching for the threadbare elephant with tears in her eyes. I kept everything I could, Victoria admitted. Even when I was trying to forget, I couldn't bring myself to throw away the things that connected me to you. Elena hugged the stuffed elephant to her chest, and for a moment, Victoria could see the 7-year-old girl she had once known. There's something else, Victoria said, pulling out a manila envelope thick with papers. I hired private investigators over the years. Not consistently, but sometimes when the guilt got too strong to bear, I would pay someone to look for you. I have reports going back 15 years. Elena opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning pages of investigative reports that traced her movements across the country. You were looking for me. Not hard enough, Victoria said. Not consistently enough. But I never completely stopped. Some part of me always knew that I needed to find you, even when I was too afraid to admit it. That night, Elena stayed in one of the mansion's many guest rooms. But Victoria found herself unable to sleep. She kept thinking about the evening they had shared, cooking together, talking, laughing at memories from their childhood. It had felt more real than anything she had experienced in 20 years. The next morning, Victoria made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. She called her housekeeper, her personal assistant, her social secretary, and began the process of dismantling Victoria Blackstone's carefully constructed life. I'm taking an extended leave of absence from all social obligations, she told each of them. Indefinitely, Elena found her in the study, surrounded by canceled invitations and resignation letters from various charity boards. You don't have to do this, Elena said quietly. I don't want to be responsible for destroying your life. Victoria looked up from the paperwork that represented years of social climbing and careful positioning. You're not destroying my life, Elena. You're helping me find it. Over the next few weeks, the sisters began planning their restaurant in earnest. They visited potential locations, developed menus that honored their grandmother's recipes while showcasing Elena's culinary expertise, and slowly began building the kind of partnership they should have had all along. The hardest part was introducing Elena to Victoria's social circle. Marcus handled most of the explanations, telling people that Victoria was taking time to focus on a new business venture with her sister. Most of their friends were politely puzzled by this sudden change in Victoria's priorities, but they accepted it with a kind of gracious indifference that characterized their social class. A few people, however, were less understanding. I don't understand what's gotten into you, Sarah Pemberton said during a tense lunch at the country club. First you have that embarrassing scene with the help, and now you're talking about opening a restaurant? It's a few people, however, were less understanding. I don't understand what's gotten into you, Sarah Pemberton said during a tense lunch at the country club. First you have that embarrassing scene with the help, and now you're talking about opening a restaurant? It's so common. Victoria looked at Sarah, this woman she had once considered a close friend, and realized she was seeing her clearly for the first time. Sarah's casual cruelty, her dismissive attitude toward anyone she considered beneath her station, her complete inability to understand that people had value beyond their net worth. You're right, Victoria said calmly. I am changing. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe we don't have as much in common as I thought. Sarah's face flushed with indignation. Victoria, really? This whole thing is so beneath you. What will people think? They'll think I finally remembered who I am. The conversation ended with Sarah storming out of the restaurant, but Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. She was tired of performing for people who valued her only for her social position, tired of pretending to care about things that ultimately meant nothing. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the kitchen of Abuela's table, watching Elena put the finishing touches on their opening night menu. The restaurant was nothing like the sterile perfection of high-end establishments where Victoria had once dined. Instead, it was warm and inviting, with mismatched wooden tables, colorful Mexican tiles, and the kind of comfortable chaos that only comes from a kitchen run with love rather than fear. The name had been Elena's idea. Abuela always said that the most important ingredient in any dish was the love you put into it, she explained. And she believed that food was meant to bring people together, to create family around a table. Victoria had thrown herself into the restaurant project with the intensity she had once reserved for charity galas and social climbing. But this felt different, meaningful in a way her previous pursuits had never been. She was building something with her sister, creating a legacy that honored their shared past while pointing toward a better future. Marcus had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, using his business connections to help them navigate licensing and permits while staying in the background to let the sisters build their dream together. Victoria had initially worried that he would feel neglected or resentful about her new priorities, but he seemed genuinely happy to see her passionate about something real. "You're more yourself now than you've been in all the years I've known you," he told her one evening as they watched Elena train the kitchen staff. "It's like watching someone come alive." Opening night was invitation only, a small gathering of family and friends to test the menu and work out any operational kinks before they opened to the public. Victoria had carefully curated the guest list, including only people who would understand and appreciate what they were trying to accomplish. Maria, the housekeeper who had first introduced them, was there with her extended family. Rosa from Abuela Rosa's had driven up from East LA with several of her regulars. A few of Victoria's more open-minded society friends had come, along with food critics and local chefs who were curious about the venture. But the most important guests were seated at the table of honor near the kitchen, 3 elderly women who had known their grandmother in the old neighborhood. Victoria and Elena had tracked them down through Rosa's connections, and they had agreed to come taste the dishes that claimed to honor their old friend's memory. "Senoras," Victoria said, approaching their table with nervous reverence, "thank you so much for coming. Elena and we wanted to make sure we were doing justice to Abuela's recipes." The oldest of the 3 women, Senora Martinez, smiled up at her with eyes that seemed to hold decades of memory. "Mija, your grandmother would be so proud to see her girls together again. She used to worry about you both. After she died, she would have wanted nothing more than for you to find each other." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "We're trying to create something she would have loved. A place where people can experience the kind of welcome she gave everyone who came to her table." As the evening progressed, Victoria moved between the dining room and kitchen, playing hostess while also helping Elena coordinate the complex dance of opening night service. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, completely different from the orchestrated perfection of her society dinner parties. When Senora Martinez tasted Elena's mole, a recipe that had taken months to perfect, combining their grandmother's traditional techniques with Elena's modern culinary training, she closed her eyes and smiled. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is exactly how Rosa's mole tasted. How did you remember?" Elena knelt beside the elderly woman's chair. "I never forgot. Every dish I've cooked in 15 years has been practiced for this moment." The validation from their grandmother's old friends meant more to the sisters than any review from a food critic could have. These women had known the original, had shared meals at their grandmother's table, and they recognized the authentic love that had gone into recreating those flavors. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Victoria and Elena found themselves alone in their restaurant for the first time. They sat at the bar, sharing a bottle of wine and looking out at the dining room that represented so much more than a business venture. "Do you think we did it right?" Elena asked. "Do you think Abuela would have approved?" Victoria looked around at the warm, welcoming space they had created, so different from the cold perfection of her Beverly Hills mansion. "I think she would have loved seeing us work together. I think she would have been proud that we found our way back to each other." Elena raised her wine glass. To Abuela for teaching us that family is the most important ingredient. To sisters, Victoria countered, and second chances. As they clinked glasses, Victoria felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. She had spent 20 years building a life as Victoria Blackstone, accumulating wealth and status and the approval of strangers. But sitting in this restaurant with her sister, surrounded by the lingering aromas of their grandmother's recipes, she finally felt like she had come home. 11. 1 year later, Abuela's Table had become one of Los Angeles' most beloved restaurants, not because of celebrity endorsements or Michelin stars, but because of the genuine warmth that Elena and Victoria had built into every aspect of the experience. Food critics praised Elena's innovative takes on traditional Mexican cuisine, but what kept customers coming back was the sense of family that permeated the space. Victoria had discovered talents she never knew she possessed. While Elena ruled the kitchen with the precision of a master conductor, Victoria had found her calling in the front of house, creating the kind of welcoming atmosphere that made every guest feel like they were dining in a friend's home. She had also discovered the joy of mentorship. The restaurant employed several young people from the old neighborhood, and Victoria took pride in helping them develop professional skills while maintaining the authentic spirit that made Abuela's Table special. "You've changed," Marcus observed one evening as they walked through the restaurant after closing. Victoria was checking on the staff as they cleaned up, making sure everyone had rides home and addressing any concerns from the day's service. "Have I?" Victoria asked, though she knew he was right. The woman who had once dismissed Elena as someone who will never amount to anything was gone, replaced by someone who understood that every person had value regardless of their position in life. "You're happier," Marcus said simply, "more at peace with yourself." It was true. Victoria had found something in this restaurant that all her years of social climbing had never provided, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own needs and desires. The restaurant had also become a bridge between Victoria's two worlds. Some of her society friends had initially been skeptical about her career change, but the quality of Elena's food and the genuine warmth of the service had won over even the most resistant customers. Sarah Pemberton had never returned after our confrontation at the country club, but Victoria found she didn't miss the friendship. She had surrounded herself with people who valued authenticity over appearances, and her life felt richer for it. One evening in late spring, as Victoria was reviewing the next day's reservations, she noticed a familiar name on the list: Isabella Rodriguez. Her heart skipped a beat before she realized it was probably a coincidence. Rodriguez was a common surname, and Isabella wasn't unusual either. But when a reservation time arrived and Victoria went to greet the new arrivals, she found herself face to face with a young woman who looked strikingly familiar. "Isabella?" Victoria asked tentatively. The young woman smiled. "Actually, I go by Izzy now. But yes, I'm Isabella Rodriguez. Are you Victoria?" Victoria's mind raced as she tried to place this young face. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Not directly," Izzy replied. "But I think you know my mother, Elena Rodriguez." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Elena had a daughter she had named Isabella, after the sister she had never stopped looking for. Elena never mentioned, Victoria began, then stopped herself. Of course, Elena wouldn't have mentioned having a child during those first difficult conversations in Colorado. There had been so much pain to work through, so many years of separation to bridge. "I wanted to meet you," Izzy continued. "My mom has told me so much about you, about your grandmother, about the restaurant. I drove down from Berkeley for spring break, and I wanted to see this place that means so much to her." Victoria led Izzy to a table near the kitchen, where Elena could see them while she worked. When Elena caught sight of her daughter through the pass-through window, her face lit up with a joy that Victoria had never seen before. During a brief lull in kitchen activity, Elena came out to embrace her daughter. "Mija, you didn't tell me you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," Izzy laughed. "And I wanted to meet the famous Aunt Victoria I've been hearing about." Aunt Victoria. The title sent a warm glow through Victoria's chest. She had a niece, a brilliant, beautiful young woman who was studying engineering at UC Berkeley and spoke about her mother with obvious love and respect. As the evening progressed, Victoria learned more about Elena's life during their years of separation. Izzy's father had been Elena's boyfriend in her early 20s, but he had left when Elena became pregnant. Elena had raised Izzy alone, working in restaurant kitchens across the country while pursuing her culinary education through night classes and correspondence courses. She never gave up hope that she'd find you someday, Izzy told Victoria during a quiet moment while Elena was busy in the kitchen. Even when things were really tough, when we were living in studio apartments and eating ramen for dinner, she would tell me stories about her sister Isabella and promise that someday we'd all be together. Victoria felt the familiar stab of guilt. While Elena had been struggling as a single mother, never losing faith that they would reunite, Victoria had been living in luxury and trying to forget she had ever had a sister. But Izzy seemed to sense her thoughts. She's not angry about those lost years, you know. Mom says that everything happened the way it was supposed to because it led you both to where you are now. And she says this restaurant, this partnership you've built together, is better than anything you could have created 20 years ago. As the evening wound down and Izzy prepared to return to Berkeley, she hugged Victoria tightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for giving my mom back her sister. She's been happier this past year than I've ever seen her." After Izzy left, Victoria found Elena in the kitchen, cleaning the last of the evening's dishes with the meditative focus she brought to all her work. "She's beautiful," Victoria said. "You should have told me about her sooner." Elena smiled without looking up from her work. "I wanted to make sure we were solid first, that we had rebuilt our foundation before adding more people to the mix. Izzy is the most important thing in my life. I couldn't risk exposing her to any uncertainty about our relationship. And now I know that you're not going anywhere, that we're family again for real this time." Victoria joined her sister at the sink, working in comfortable silence as they had so many times during their childhood. It felt natural, this domestic rhythm, this shared purpose. "Elena," Victoria said finally, "I need you to know something. This restaurant, our partnership, finding each other again, it's the best thing I've ever done. Better than my marriage, better than all the success and money and status I accumulated. This is what I was supposed to do with my life." Elena set down the dish she was washing and turned to face her sister. "Isabella, do you remember what Abuela used to say about the circle of life?" Victoria thought for a moment, then smiled as the memory surfaced. She said that everything comes back around eventually, that the love we put out into the world finds its way back to us, even if it takes years. 20 years, Elena said softly. "It took 20 years for us to find our way back to each other. But we did it. We closed the circle." Victoria looked around the kitchen of their restaurant, this warm, bustling space that had become the heart of their rebuilt family. On the walls hung photos of their grandmother, pictures of a neighborhood where they had grown up, images of the journey that had brought them back together. It wasn't the life Victoria had planned when she became Mrs. Marcus Blackstone. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. 2 years after opening, Abuela's Table had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a community hub, a place where cultures mixed and families were formed around shared meals and shared stories. Victoria had never imagined that the scared little girl from East LA could create something so meaningful, so lasting. The success had brought opportunities Victoria could never have anticipated. Food Network wanted to feature the restaurant in a documentary about family-owned establishments. Publishers were interested in a cookbook combining Elena's recipes with Victoria's story of redemption and reunion. Celebrity chefs called asking for collaborations. But the opportunity that excited Victoria most was the one that had arrived just that morning in the form of a phone call from a social worker in Phoenix. "Mrs. Blackstone? This is Sandra Williams from Arizona Child Protective Services. I understand you and your sister run a restaurant that employs young people from disadvantaged backgrounds." Victoria had confirmed this, wondering where the conversation was heading. "We have a situation here, siblings ages 15 and 12 who have been in the foster system for 3 years. They're aging out of their current placement, and frankly, we're running out of options. The older one, Maria, has been working in restaurant kitchens to help support her younger brother, and she's remarkably talented despite her age." Victoria's heart had begun racing as Sandra continued. "I know, this is unconventional, but would you and your sister be willing to meet with them? Maybe offer some kind of mentorship program or even employment? These kids have been through a lot, but they're fighters. They remind me of some success stories I've heard about your own backgrounds. Now, as Victoria sat in Abuela's table's private dining room waiting for the social worker to arrive with Maria and Diego Santos, she felt the familiar nervous energy that came with life-changing moments. Elena was in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal that would let them talk while the children ate. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked quietly. He had driven over from his office to provide moral support, understanding instinctively that this meeting carried emotional weight beyond a simple business decision. "I'm sure," Victoria replied, though her hands were trembling slightly. "Elena and I know what it's like to be abandoned, to feel like the world has forgotten you. If we can make a difference for these kids." The door chimed, and Victoria rose to greet their visitors. Sandra Williams was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who carried herself with the weary competence of someone who had seen too much human suffering. Behind her walked two children who immediately reminded Victoria of herself and Elena at the same age. Maria Santos was 15 but looked older, with the premature maturity that comes from taking responsibility for someone else's survival. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she held herself with careful dignity despite her obvious nervousness. Her younger brother Diego stayed close to her side, a small boy with large eyes who seemed to take in everything while saying nothing. "Maria, Diego," Sandra said gently, "these are the people I told you about, Victoria and Elena, who own this restaurant." Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food, nothing fancy, just the kind of comfort dishes that spoke of care rather than ceremony. She set the tray on the table and smiled at the children. "You must be hungry after the long drive," Elena said simply. "Please sit, eat." Victoria watched as Elena's natural warmth began to work its magic on the nervous children. Maria relaxed slightly at the lack of pressure, the absence of formal interview questions or probing about their background. Diego crept closer to the table, drawn by the aromas of Elena's cooking. As the children ate, Victoria found herself studying Maria's face, looking for signs of the resilience that would be necessary for what she and Elena were considering. She saw wariness there, but also intelligence and determination. Maria was protecting her brother, making sure he ate first, staying alert for any signs of danger or deception. "Sandra tells us you've been working in restaurants," Victoria said carefully, not wanting to sound like she was interviewing the girl. Maria nodded, swallowing before she answered. "Mostly washing dishes, some prep work. I know it's illegal because of my age, but Diego needs to eat in the foster home." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable revealing too much. "The foster home doesn't provide enough food?" Elena asked gently. "They provide what they're required to," Maria said diplomatically. "But Diego is growing and he gets hungry at school. I wanted to make sure he had lunch money." Victoria exchanged glances with Elena. They both recognized the careful way Maria was protecting her brother while avoiding direct criticism of their placement. It was the survival skill of a child who had learned that complaining could make things worse. "What do you want to do when you're older?" Victoria asked. "After you turn 18? For the first time, Maria's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of the dream she carried. "I want to go to culinary school. I want to cook real food, not just wash dishes. And I want Diego to be able to stay in school, maybe go to college someday." "That sounds like a good plan," Elena said. "Hard work, but good." Sandra cleared her throat. "The thing is, Maria ages out of the system in less than 3 years. Diego would likely be placed elsewhere, and there's no guarantee they'd be able to stay in contact. That's why I reached out to you. I was hoping maybe you could provide some kind of support system, help them transition to independence together." Victoria felt the weight of the moment settling around her. These children were facing the same separation she and Elena had endured, the same forced splitting of a family bond that had taken them 20 years to repair. What if they didn't have to age out? Victoria heard herself saying. What if they had a different option? Everyone at the table looked at her in surprise. Even Elena seemed startled by the direction Victoria was heading. "Victoria," Marcus said quietly, "are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that Elena and I know something about what it's like to lose family, and we know something about finding it again." Victoria's voice grew stronger as the idea crystallized in her mind. "We have a big house, a successful business, and more resources than we could ever need. Why couldn't we provide a home for Maria and Diego?" Sandra leaned forward intently. Are you talking about adoption? Or foster care? I'm talking about family, Victoria said simply. Whatever legal framework makes that possible. Elena set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Maria. What do you think? Would you want to come live with us, work in our restaurant, learn the business while you finish school? Maria stared at them both as if they were speaking a foreign language. You would do that? For us? But you don't even know us. We know enough, Elena replied. We know you're smart and hardworking and devoted to your brother. We know you have dreams and the determination to pursue them. And we know what it's like to be 15 and afraid that the world doesn't have a place for you. Diego, who had been silently listening to the adult conversation while focusing on his food, suddenly spoke up. Would we be allowed to stay together? Victoria's heart broke at the question. Yes, Mijo. You would stay together. That's the most important thing. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of practical discussions, legal requirements, home studies, transition periods. Sandra was cautiously optimistic about the possibility, noting that Victoria and Marcus's financial stability and Elena's experience with single parenthood would work in their favor. But the moment that mattered most came as Sandra was preparing to leave with the children. Maria approached Victoria hesitantly, still clearly struggling to believe that this opportunity might be real. Mrs. Blackstone, she said quietly, why would you want to do this for us? Victoria knelt down to meet Maria's eyes, seeing herself at 15, proud, scared, desperate for someone to believe in her potential. Because 20 years ago, someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. And because family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to love each other, to take care of each other, to never give up on each other. Victoria smiled. Elena and I lost each other for a long time, but we found our way back. Now we want to make sure you and Diego never have to lose each other. At all. Maria nodded solemnly, as if accepting a sacred trust. We won't let you down. You couldn't, Victoria assured her, because you're already everything you need to be. Epilogue, 5 years later. Victoria stood in the kitchen of Abuela's table on a busy Saturday evening, watching the controlled chaos of dinner service with the satisfaction of someone who had found her true calling. The restaurant had expanded twice in the past 5 years, but they had been careful to maintain the intimate family atmosphere that made the place special. Elena called out orders from the past with the authority of a master chef, while Maria, now 20 and a culinary school graduate, worked beside her as sous chef. Diego, 17 and about to start his senior year of high school, helped coordinate the front of house service with the confidence of someone who had grown up in the business. Behind you, called Izzy, now graduated from Berkeley and working as the restaurant's operations manager while she saved money for graduate school. She carried a tray of plated appetizers toward the dining room, where Marcus was hosting a table of potential investors for their planned second location. Victoria smiled as she watched her chosen family work together with the seamless coordination that came from years of practice and genuine affection. This was what their grandmother had envisioned when she talked about the importance of the family table, not just blood relatives, but all the people who chose to love and support each other. Tia Victoria, Diego called out, using the title that still made her heart warm every time she heard it. Cable 12 is asking about the story behind the mole recipe. Should I tell them the whole thing? Tell them everything, Victoria replied. Tell them about Abuela, about the importance of cooking with love, about how food brings families together. The whole thing had become something of a legend among their regular customers. The story of two sisters separated by circumstances, reunited by chance, and brought together by their shared commitment to honoring their grandmother's legacy. It was a story that spoke to universal themes of family, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. Victoria had never returned to her old social circle. The charity galas and society dinner parties that had once seemed so important now felt like elaborate performances with no real meaning. She had found something better, a community built around authentic connections rather than social positioning. Her relationship with Marcus had only grown stronger as they built this new life together. He had thrown himself into supporting the restaurant and their expanded family with the same intensity he brought to his business ventures, but tempered with a warmth and humanity that his corporate success had never demanded. I need to check on the new reservations, Victoria told Elena as the dinner rush began to wind down. She made her way to the hostess station, where the reservation book held the names of tomorrow's guests. As she scanned the list, one name caught her attention. Sarah Pemberton, Party of 4. Victoria stared at the entry, remembering the woman who had once been her closest friend in the society world, who had stormed out of their final lunch together after accusing Victoria of becoming common. She hadn't heard from Sarah in 5 years, hadn't even thought about her in months. What would bring her to Abuela's table now? The next evening, Victoria watched from the kitchen as Sarah entered the restaurant with her husband and another couple Victoria didn't recognize. Sarah looked older, more brittle somehow, but still impeccably dressed and perfectly composed. Victoria debated whether to approach the table or let someone else handle the service, but eventually her curiosity won out. She made her way across the dining room, steeling herself for whatever confrontation might follow. "Sarah," she said simply as she reached the table. "Welcome to Abuela's table." Sarah looked up, and Victoria was surprised to see something like vulnerability in her expression. "Victoria, you look well." "I am well," Victoria replied honestly. "Very well. How are you?" Sarah hesitated, glancing around at the warm, bustling restaurant. "I wanted to see what you've built here. I've been hearing such wonderful things." Victoria gestured to an empty chair at a nearby table. "Would you like to talk? Privately?" Sarah excused herself from her party and followed Victoria to the quieter table. For a moment, they sat in awkward silence, 20 years of friendship and 5 years of estrangement hanging between them. "I owe you an apology," Sarah said finally. "The way I reacted when you told me about this place, about your sister, I was cruel and small-minded." Victoria waited, sensing there was more. "My daughter Emma started college last year," Sarah continued. "She's been volunteering at a community kitchen in San Francisco, working with homeless families. She called me last month to tell me about a woman she met there, a single mother with 2 young children, living out of her car but still trying to provide good meals for her kids." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Emma said this woman reminded her of something she'd heard about your background, about how you and your sister grew up, and she asked me why I thought people like that were somehow less deserving of respect than people like us." Victoria felt a familiar stab of empathy. "What did you tell her?" "I couldn't answer her, because I realized I didn't have a good reason. I'd spent so many years thinking that money and status made me better than other people, but when my own daughter challenged me on it..." Sarah wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. "I realized I'd become someone I didn't particularly like." Victoria reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "It's never too late to become someone different." "Is it really that simple?" "No," Victoria said honestly. "It's not simple at all. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever done, admitting that the person I'd created wasn't the person I was meant to be. But it's possible, and it's worth it." Sarah looked around the restaurant again, taking in the diverse crowd of diners, the obvious affection between the staff, the genuine warmth that permeated the space. "You've built something beautiful here." "Elena and I built it together," Victoria corrected. "Along with our kids, our extended family, our community. It's not just a restaurant. It's proof that family can be whatever you need it to be, as long as it's built on love." Sarah stayed for the full dinner, sampling Elena's menu and listening to Diego tell the story of their grandmother's recipes. When she left, she hugged Victoria tightly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me that it's possible to change." As Victoria watched Sarah leave with her party, she felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with growth. She had become the person she was always meant to be, not Victoria Blackstone the socialite, but Isabella Vasquez, who happened to have married well, who had chosen to use her privilege to build bridges rather than walls. Later that evening, as the family gathered around the kitchen table to share a simple meal after closing, Victoria looked around at the faces that had become her world. Elena, her sister and partner, who had never given up hope that family could be restored. Marcus, her husband and anchor, who loved her for who she was rather than who she pretended to be. Maria, brilliant and driven, who would soon open their second location as head chef. Diego, thoughtful and kind, who was already talking about studying business so he could help expand their impact. Izzy, creative and passionate, who brought fresh ideas while honoring their grandmother's legacy. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, noticing Victoria's contemplative expression. I'm thinking about circles, Victoria replied. About how Abuela always said that love finds its way back to us, even if it takes time. About how we built something here that she would recognize, even though it's not exactly what any of us planned. Elena smiled. She would have loved this chaos. She would have loved seeing her granddaughters cooking together again, Maria added, and Victoria's heart swelled at being included in that description. Diego raised his glass of agua fresca. To Abuela, who taught us that family is the most important ingredient. To second chances, as he added. To finding your way home, Marcus contributed. To sisters, Elena said, looking directly at Victoria. Victoria raised her own glass, looking around the table at the family she had lost and found and built and chosen. To love that comes full circle. As they clinked glasses in the warm kitchen of Abuela's table, Victoria felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived authentically. She had started as Isabella Vasquez, became Victoria Blackstone, and finally learned to be both, honoring her past while building her future, using her privilege to lift others rather than separate herself from them. The scared little girl who had once promised her sister they would find each other again had kept that promise, even when it took 20 years and required becoming someone entirely different first. But the most important lesson Victoria had learned wasn't about keeping promises or finding family or building success. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you've chosen the wrong path, and to do the hard work of becoming the person you were always meant to be. Because sometimes the longest journey isn't across the country or through the years. It's the journey back to your own authentic self. In the end, Victoria Blackstone's greatest achievement wasn't the mansion in Beverly Hills or the successful restaurant or the social status she had once thought so important. It was learning that love, real, unconditional, transformative love, was worth any sacrifice, any admission of failure, any surrender of pride. She had mocked her chef and discovered her sister. But more importantly, she had found herself. And that finally felt like coming home. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button, subscribe for more cinematic stories, and share your experience in the comments. Have you faced betrayal? How did you rebuild? Your words might inspire someone who desperately needs hope today. Until next time, stay strong, stay loyal, and choose your family wisely.